At what point is the private sector willing to pay to do what needs to be done in the region?
We have a diet of limitations, but not a sufficient discourse on our possibilities.
This is a critical step in our regional integration process.
Mistrust within countries is defeating us. It's not an economic matter, that is a matter for mindset.
West Indian people, we are a gem.
Let's advance our partnership together through the region.
Let us organize and do that together.
We need to ensure that there's transparency in what we do.
I do it because I love it. I'm passionate about watching things grow.
If there's a will, you will find a way to make it happen.
The next speaker to talk about, to do business, Mr. Solomon spoke about it, we need financing. So Mr. Yves Ferreira is our head of the regional representation for the Caribbean at the European Investment Bank and has a wealth of experience in development financing. I introduce Mr. Ferreira.
Thank you very much. Honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good afternoon. We've just learned that time is important in trade, international trade. As I'm biased, I would say so is finance. Indeed, when we look at the success of countries like Korea in the 60s or China in the 90s, which have transformed themselves from third world countries into worldwide economic powerhouses, thanks to export-led growth, we tend to forget that among the factors of success was extremely aggressive export finance. So when we talk about forming a new strategic framework to boost exports from the region, it is very relevant to discuss the issue of affordable financing. So what I would like to share with you is what is the state of play in this respect in the region? What have governments, what have regional bodies, what have multilaterals like ourselves done in this area? What can we learn from experiences in other parts of the world? Here we are. So let's take an example. An exporter out of the Caribbean, he's got traditional customers in the US or in the UK, but now is confronted to a business opportunity in Mongolia or in Vietnam, countries he has never had any relationship with. So how is he going to be able to convince his bank in Jamaica to open a letter of credit for an importer in one of those countries? It's going to be extremely complicated because commercial lenders are sometimes either unable or unwilling to provide exporters with financing facilities because, of course, of the political or commercial risks associated to this type of transactions. As a consequence, governments in the region have set up export support mechanisms. I've listed here a few. For instance, Exim Bank in Jamaica absorbed the functions of the Jamaica Export Credit Insurance Corporation established in 1971 by the Bank of Jamaica, and now it is 100% owned by the government of Jamaica. The Exim Bank of Trinidad and Tobago emerged out of the TNT Export Credit Insurance Company, also established by the government in 1973. We've got, for instance, the Central Bank of Barbados that set up 2 export finance guarantee schemes in 1978. At the regional level, we had the ECCB, which developed also 2 schemes in respectively 1984 and 1988. And I've recently learned that in the Dominican Republic, with the support of Korea, they are also considering establishing a Dominican Republic Export Bank. However, are we talking about a level playing field? We've seen throughout these 2 days that participating in the global economy provides immense opportunities. But unfortunately, some emerging economies exporters cannot compete internationally only on the basis of price or quality of their services. They also have to be able to access competitive export credit and export finance facilities. Therefore, export credit agencies that basically provide credit insurance or guarantees, or export exim banks that provide loans and therefore funding, when they exist, are not competing on a level playing field with their OECD counterparts or even counterparts from emerging economies, because basically of their lower credit quality that, of course, derives in a higher cost of funding, but also their very narrow range of products. For instance, if we go back to the different institutions that were listed in the previous slide, they provide export credit insurance that cover political risk and commercial risk. That's quite standard. They provide finance such as pre-shipment or post-shipment loans. But these institutions, first of all, as I said, they have got a higher cost of funding. Sometimes they cannot provide more than very short-term facilities. And sometimes they don't have the capacity to enter into transactions of a certain size. So when we talk about providing short-term funding for an exporter of coffee to Europe or to Japan, it's okay. But if we're talking about an engineering company trying to get a contract in Central America that will have to compete against contractors from other parts of the world that will come and provide long-term buyer's credit, and all they can do is provide short-term buyer's credit, they just cannot compete. So what have we seen in terms of regional initiatives to try to overcome those issues? We've seen the establishment of certain regional export credit agencies or regional exim banks as a way to improve offer to exporters of competitive package, but also to facilitate regional economic integration through increased intra-regional trade. We've got, for instance, the example of the African Export-Import Bank, which was established in 1993 by African governments, African private sector, and institutional investors, but also non-African financial institutions. They provide finance for intra-African trade, but also for extra-regional trade, including, as I mentioned before, long-term buyer's credit. We've got also in the region another example, the Foreign Trade Bank of Latin America, known as BLADEX, that started operations in 1979. Basically, as of today, its shareholders are private investors, banks and financial institutions, and also central banks. And very interesting, among those central banks, we've got the Central Bank of Barbados, Banco Reservas of Dominican Republic, Banque de la République d'Haïti of Haiti, National Export-Import Bank of Jamaica, the Central Bank of Suriname, and also the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. What type of other response have we seen? Also, national development banks trying to fill a gap. For instance, in Europe, we've got the example of KfW from Germany that are, since the end of World War II, set up a special window to support exporters. Around the corner in Brazil, we've got BNDES, which has also established since 1990 an export window, and which aims at supporting Brazilian exporters with short-term facilities, but also long-term financing. Talking now about the multilaterals. Traditionally, a multilateral development bank would focus on financing companies that want to expand their export capabilities by investing in new machinery will finance ports in order to facilitate exports of goods out of a certain country. But more and more, we see there's definitely a gap to be filled in the market. Our role will never be to compete with existing commercial banks, but to try to help them provide the services their export customers require. So as we've got a AAA credit rating, we can borrow funds at a very low rate and of course provide those funds to the banks for them to be able to finance their customers, being it on a short-term or a medium-term basis. We can also provide guarantees to these banks. For instance, coming back to my example of an exporter of coffee to Vietnam, the local bank will not be comfortable with the bank of the importer in Vietnam because they don't know the bank, they have never done business with it, and therefore a multilateral will come and guarantee the risk that represents this bank. So the bank here in this part of the world will be confident to open and confirm the letter of credit of the exporter. So just to name a few examples, we've got the IFC Global Trade Finance Program established in 2005, IDB's Trade Finance Facilitation Program also established the same year, and we are, as EIB, we are seriously also considering this type of product. So we will help your bankers provide you with the competitive finance that you need to be able to play on a level playing field with your competitors, because again, as I said initially, the competitiveness of finance determines the competitiveness of your goods and services. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you much, Mr. Ferreira. Moving right along, standing between you and lunch, is Mr. David Gomez. And I now invite him to tell you what he's going to do to create that platform for export-led growth and development. Mr. David Gomez of Caribbean Export.
I'm glad that a couple of the people went before me because I'm just not somebody who has ever towed the line. And sometimes I'm, as the people who are very close to me and around me keep saying, you can't say that, David. David, you can't say that. And Zamani, who was in my office, always said, no, 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 you can't say. I think I give him more Tylenol moments than anybody else around me. But because for me, I think what has happened to us in the Caribbean is that we've remained mired in the period of 1865, as James has said. And when you look at the way we've approached trade negotiations, that has been it. I think we've adopted the wrong stance for negotiating the trade issues for us. We've always negotiated to protect the preferential markets and interests instead of negotiating to carve out new competitive niches or niches that our products can compete in. And I don't necessarily see it, and I beg to differ with my colleague here, I don't see trade as something that happens at the country level. But that is how we tend to deal with the issue. Trade is something that happens at the enterprise level. And it goes now even beyond that. It's no longer it's not C2C for sure. It's not country to country. It's not even only B2B anymore. It's business to consumer now. And so the export platforms that have existed for decades within the region have to change. But they've not changed. Let me walk you back a little bit. Export development for us has been largely informed by preferential market access. We traded on sugar because the colonial masters came down. They thought sugar could grow good here, tobacco could grow good here, and that's where we traded. Logwood and everything in Belize and mahogany and Suriname and the different places, that's how it happened. But that has changed. And if we continue to trade in those products that are primary level, it is no wonder then that we suffer declining terms of trade. because we're trading in products that are on the decline. The problem is that whenever we've attempted diversification, that diversification has often been horizontal in nature, meaning that we've attempted to carve out new export sectors, which we also attempted to trade under preferential market access arrangements, or where we protected it in such a way that we didn't want any competition. The reality is, folks, we're operating in a competitive global environment now. So all of the export platforms that we had before, on the colonial markets, it was that was one type of platform that we traded based on what the colonial masters wanted. And then we moved to preferential markets, sugar and bananas. Those were king. And they continue to be so, and large foreign currency earners for a number of our countries, because we've never migrated the production of any of those up the value chain. And then we had the panacea, the response for everybody, export processing zones. So everybody across the region started setting up export processing zones. In the Dominican Republic, they went in 1982 from having about 15 to 18,000 persons employed in export processing zones to by 1990 having 120,000 employed within them. In Belize, it was the same thing. And if you look across the region, Jamaica, everybody who has set up an export processing zone, that became then the new platform through which we would get to the global markets. But we never really addressed the issue of building competitiveness. We continued to manufacture products which were inferior in quality, never met global market standards, but which we felt we needed to protect because it provided employment. But I would beg to argue that perhaps the approach needs to be changed. What we need to do is to migrate away from that. This focus now on data processing zones is only, it's a cat of a different color, man. It's similar to export processing zones, and we're not doing anything about raising the level of productivity and the level of competitiveness of our economies. And I think on that score, what I want to do is to expand what Ambassador Mathurin has said. It's not about only strengthening, for me at least, the productive base. It's about diversifying the productive base. Because if all we do is strengthen the productive base, and that productive base is predicated upon a number of sectors which are in decline and which we have nowhere to go with, then in effect we've strengthened something that can't work for us. If those are the sectors which are supposed to be drivers of economic development for the region, then what we need to do is to address that at a fundamental level and make the changes happen there. So for me, I think what we're faced with now is a new global framework, and that is one where trade is based on competitive products that are globally competitive, products and services that are globally competitive. What that requires then is that we have an understanding of global value chains and of how, as producers and traders, we fit into that. It can't be for the 4,000 pepper producers across the region that each of us grows the best hot pepper, each of us has the best recipe, each of us has the best bottle for it, and each of us can do it. Because the fact remains that if I put those 4,000 hot sauces, and that's a bit of an exaggeration in terms of numbers, against a Tabasco in any supermarket anywhere in the world, no matter how good Aunt Susie is, or Aunt Jemima, or Uncle John, Tabasco is what will sell before any of those. The point I'm getting to there is that in a new global competitive environment, the export platform is not one of an EPZ, it's not one of a preferential market, it's not one of a colonial market relationships, it is one of global branding, of export branding. And this is something that we pitched in the agency when we entered about a year and a half ago. And there was strong resistance to it, because people just did not believe that that is where we're going, or that is where we need to go. So I've been very happy to hear over the last day and a half that from the private sector stakeholders at least, that message has been coming forward. Because for us, that really is where the entire issue of future trade resides in anybody. If you look at, and if you recall the story that was being told by Kiran on Smack's Tea yesterday, it is about building his brand value perception in the global market. It's not about anything else. He's not trying to compete saying that he is a West Indian tea company against Indian tea company or any of the others. It's about building the global brand value perception for Smacks as a tea that is produced by the West Indian Tea Company. And when Kiran gets where he wants to go with that, then he would be able to piggyback any other product onto that, because he would have delivered then on the experience that that brand promises to the market. And that is what we don't have. That is what we don't have across the region. And my childhood friend from Belize said it yesterday. You know what? What you guys need to do is to stop taking people to trade shows when they have absolutely no ability to meet market demand there. And I completely agree with him. We have spent way too much time taking people out to markets who don't, to the point where they don't even have business cards sometimes, to position products which have absolutely no ability to meet the global market demand. Why? Because we're not competitive. You speak to a Busha Brown out of Jamaica. His products can sit on any shelf in any supermarket, any Publix, any Whole Foods, anywhere, because those products deliver value for what the brand promises. That has to be the platform through which we position trade for the future for this region. And that would apply to anything that has to do with goods, and it would apply to anything that has to do with services. Because when we talk about expanding now the markets into, or getting the banks bear into other parts of the world, it is not about shipping banks from here to there. And for me, it's not even about setting up a new production facility there. I would want to refer you then to the lady who is the owner of the brand for Corona. She makes her $300 or $400 US million a year, not by producing Corona all over the world, but by franchising and licensing out that brand. She spends the rest of her time in beauty parlors and riding yachts and in wherever else. Hopefully some of it is spent in the Caribbean. But those are the platforms where we need to go. All of them derive from branding, not from anything else. If we continue on this nonsensical trail of negotiating at country levels, of trying to say we will go down and figure out what works here and works there, we're not going to have the successes that I am sure this region is capable of. What we need to do is to begin to negotiate based on a program and an ability to develop the private sector, and the ability of that private sector to produce regional brands that can be globally competitive. That is where Caribbean Export will take this region. We're not about providing the support to the subsistence operators or to those who are not interested, Uncle James's Aunt Jemima, who only sells outside the school. We can't do anything for her. That is not who we should be working with. Because if we go down that road then of having brand as the platform, then the ability for us to begin to capture the intellectual property that is resident in a lot of the products, goods, and services that we produce becomes a possibility. And for many of us now, it becomes a reality. Tough Gong Music, which sells out of the Bob Marley Enterprise Holdings, has a brand recognition that makes it appealing now for other artists to want to come under that same brand. It's a Tough Gong. A Grace Kennedy is able to achieve the global success it has been able to achieve because it has leveraged the brand Grace Kennedy, and it has delivered on the promise that Grace Kennedy has encapsulated within that brand. And if any of you don't understand where I'm going with this, what I'm saying is that what we need to do now is to take and shift our production processes, to take the products that we're currently playing and toying around with, and look seriously at how we position any of those within the global value chain, and then to move to begin to deliver along that global value chain for any of us. What you've seen coming out of Caribbean Export over the last year and a half under the leadership of our executive director are a number of platforms or a number of programs based on the platform of export branding that have not been very popular in the first instance, but that have delivered results. Breakpoint is meant to be that kind of a platform where we introduce participants now to a new mechanism for getting into the European market and for any other market for that matter, where we work with the enterprises to get them to understand how to position their brands to potential investors, to potential distributors, to see if those could be snapped up to get into the markets. Design Caribbean. It is staged as a trade show, but for me and for us, it's not a trade show. It is an export platform that seeks to position the highest quality goods and products from the creative industries, from the cultural industries that's produced within this region, and hopefully through which we can put them into the international market through the brand Design Caribbean. That is where we intend to take this, and what I believe to be the new global platform all derives from that, from export branding and brand development. But that then demands from us that we have more effective business matchmaking, which we attempt to do through the number of exchanges that we do. So our missions on trade shows are no longer just about taking people to be able to display and exhibit their products. It's about providing them with an opportunity to make the right kinds of matchmaking with persons who are interested in their products or product areas. And in an earlier meeting today, we had a number of requests coming from the private sector to ensure that Caribbean Export provides the market intelligence to allow for that to happen in a better way. I think for us it goes beyond just the market intelligence. It's about providing competitive intelligence now, or competitiveness intelligence. Export branding as a platform demands better competitiveness intelligence. It demands more effective business support organizations. And unfortunately for a number of us, that will entail a sifting out of the fittest of the fittest. But for us, we understand that that is a process that has to be endured. Because if we are to be successful in taking regional brands that have the ability to be globally competitive into where they want to go, then we must be able to work with those companies that have the DNA to get there. And I think from Caribbean Export's point of view, that is perhaps the approach that we need to adopt.
Thank you, David. I hope you all took note of what he was saying. I hope it was understood, and Pam, I hope it doesn't cause you too much stress going forward. But I think he was spot on. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy might take him up, you know. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this session. I think we really should give Caribbean Export a round of applause for putting on this initiative. And I also think it is noteworthy that both Minister Pinder and Minister Hilton stayed throughout the entire session and hopefully heard something new, something different that you all can adopt, and I think it's noteworthy that you stayed. Thank you very much for that. And of course, DG Oganda Laura for being with us throughout on behalf of CARICOM, of course, Caribbean Export staff. So as not to eat into question time, I'll now open up the floor to questions, not speeches. And no, Claude, that wasn't directed at you, just generally. But it is applicable to you.
Thank you. This question is for Mr. Moss Solomon. I guess it came out from your first innings and second innings. If the private sector bigwigs are not there to champion the advocacy for the private sector at the forefront, what do we need to do to replace that? Is it that to engage the governance architecture, we need to say less about there being a political directorate as if it's some space away? Or should business representatives have lobbyists? Or should we actually have business people within the governance architecture become elected because I don't think that is going to change that. The politicians are going to have to be also business people and need to be influenced by pursue those interests.
So let's let him answer that.
Well, it's a very, very good question, because the answer to that is, who will bell the cat? I have tried to bell the cat. I said, listen, if you accept that international trade is important for your business, growth and development, and you are the CEO, then your responsibility is to be represented here either by yourself or by somebody who can sign a check. Okay? That's a simple way I put it. Don't bother send me the fifth string team who now have to go back and consult and think. The CEO of companies that are involved in global expansion need to be the people involved. If not, they must send the people who are empowered to come, who can take decisions based on the information that they receive when they visit these places. And that's our major problem. No, I tell them that. Maybe I'm not the right one. I've been telling them that for years. So maybe it's the ministers who need to tell them that, or somebody else who can wake them up. But they can't be sitting down in their offices worrying about what happened yesterday in an environment where we need to look at what is possible to happen tomorrow and into the future. That can't be a criteria for a CEO if I was hiring a CEO.
Okay, I think both ministers want to respond to that. So I'll take the minister with the mic, and then Minister Hilton.
Sorry, Minister Hilton. I just wanted to firstly commend Caribbean Export, but also I want to raise an important issue that was discussed in the context of Design Caribbean. Certainly Design Caribbean is being hosted in the Bahamas this year. But I think that you raised an excellent point that whether it's through value chain trade or whatever the production cycle is throughout the region, that connecting the private sector with these distribution facilities for market access is important, because you could negotiate your trade agreements for market access, but then you got to get the private sector participants in a forum to move the product back and forth. And I think the concept of Design Caribbean is an excellent avenue for that. I do caution, however, that we have to be very careful in how we have a narrow definition of what products are inclusive in these engagements. For instance, we have a representative from the Bahamas here, from the private sector, who is a recipient of a grant through CETA, I think, and the EU, to establish a very high quality jams and jellies and pepper sauce business, and is very successful. We also have representatives from the Bahamas who are taking, for instance, neem, and creating soaps and oils and everything else from these agribusiness type of matters. And then how do we take those high quality agribusiness and do the same thing with Design Caribbean, whether it be within that context or another? Because I think we do have to define the markets we're good at, the markets we have high quality in, and then how do we get them outside? And it's not every market, but it's niche markets. That we leverage the expertise from our different islands. So I just want to put that as an observation rather than a question, because we do have to connect our private sectors with international private sectors in areas that we can grow and we can advance in, rather than areas we may just be uncompetitive in by the nature of who we are. So I just want to put that out, say let's be very careful in not overly defining what types of markets and industries are put into these types of frameworks and sectors.
If I just may suggest, the Taste of the Caribbean event, is anyone from the CTO or CHTA here? Maybe there can be a trade show of Caribbean specialty products alongside that, if it's not already being done and you have a captive market.
Well, thank you. I think not only were we here, but we both were listening and hearing the same things, because I wanted to react to two things. One, let me start with the one that Jimmy, that was asked and Mr. Solomon attempted to answer. I think, and they really kind of fall in the same line with what Caribbean Export is saying, which is, I think at some stage, and probably now is as good a time, because we're going to have to make some hard choices, take some tough decisions, because not taking a decision is simply to pass it, to kick the can down the road. And I agree that the Design Caribbean kinds of showcasing, or really platforms, is probably where a regional agency like Caribbean Export needs to be positioning itself. I think at the national level, a lot of those issues have to be worked through at the national level, not without linkages back and forth with what is happening at the region. But I think it's one thing to say somebody wants to engage in an activity that is really intended to, as we say in Jamaica, eat a food, as opposed to someone who wants to engage in genuine export trade. The person who simply wants to eat a food. He's not really making any moves about it. He's not interested in branding. He's not interested in doing a number of the things that you must do if you're serious about engaging global trade. No, it may be that he or she has a product that can go much further. And it is at the level, as I said, perhaps national organization, that you begin to identify those products with capability and give it the kinds of push that it needs. But I think, given the resource limitation, the danger that the minister speaks of, I think a lot of that can be attenuated, but again, by the region, the national engagement and the national push to make sure that the personal Caribbean export is not so narrow as to exclude things just because they're from the Bahamas or Jamaica, rather than on the base of quality. But we can surveil that and respond to it. Yeah. The point, though, is that my own view is that in the crisis that has emerged in the region, my sense is that I personally feel it's a time for plain talk and truth-telling and just speaking very clearly to people, and for politicians to understand that whatever decision they take, they're going to be held accountable for that decision, and it better works. Because as Minister of Industry and Commerce, at the end of a term, my cabinet, my prime minister, my country is going to say to me, well, what have you delivered in this period? And I have to say, as I have said to some of the leading business people in my country, we have a forum to which I chair, and I said to them, if you are not coming, send nobody else. You will not be represented. Don't send anybody else here. And they have responded. I mean, one person sent somebody, and I served the notice, and they saw me and apologized, and said, Minister, next week I'll be there. So I believe people are ready because they recognize that we're in a crisis mode. And when ministers say, don't send your second tier or third tier people who can't take any decision, I think they'll respond. And I think we just have to step up and do what we have to do as well. Thank you. But I want to congratulate Caribbean Export. I think this has been a tremendous 2 days.
Jimmy?
Could I just, to both ministers, I think that the idea has come through. Minister Pinder, where I sit nowadays at the University of the West Indies, I have a tremendous amount of interaction with people who are doing MBA programs and master's programs in different fields. But we need assistance to change the mindset of what they're doing. Often I'm called to adjudicate on grade on panels of marketing presentations from these groups who are asked to take a product which hasn't been exported before and develop an export plan. Now, Minister, here's our problem. All of them come with some good ideas which they have got from reading some marketing texts that they have been referred to. The question is, somebody has a really good product let's just theoretically say it is a sauce. The main flavor ingredient of that sauce is guava. And some other things that they have mixed this thing rather nicely. They come to the end of the presentation and ask them a question. You are here in Jamaica. Where are you going to get the guava if you get an order from Walmart? How many thousand tons of guava can you get? And it is something that I know my friend Winston Stoner has had to confront. So he has to have sourcing alternatives. Our people generally are not thinking about that. Having spent 200, 500,000 US dollars to get Busher Brownie's products on the shelves of some rather nice supermarkets and retail outlets that are appropriate for his brand, he cannot afford to miss an order. So we can't tell them, yes, but we are going to go in the Bahamas, but we are going to go and look for peppers. We need to have a formulation that says, well, listen, if I really need 10 tons of pepper, where am I going to get it? And if I need, we stop making guava jelly for ourselves because it would take the truck 4 days he's on the road around Jamaica to get a half load of guava because I've never seen 500 acres of guava in Jamaica. These are the realities that we need to talk about when we're talking about expansion. Every year I go to an agricultural show at Denby, and there's some wonderful products there. Pimento liqueur, these kind of things, homemade things, and they are really tasting nice. And when I look at the source of raw material, there's no continuity in our being able. So I'm suggesting to people, we preach to them, say, develop a formula, patent your formula like Coca-Cola, so that if necessary you can make it in 190 countries just like Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Yes, my name is Mr. Lacascar. I'm Deputy Director for European Affairs and International Cooperation in the island of Martinique. I would like to, first of all, congratulate Caribbean Export for a very excellent framework. I was just taking a look at the West Indian Commission, and I remember my days as a scholar. And when I hear the Caribbean, and when I look at the ways to, as David was saying, to have competitive intelligence, I think we have to also look at new ways, as Ambassador Matherin was saying, to engage with other non-independent territories in the Caribbean. And in that sense, I would like to make a pitch to see if we could also look at promoting Caribbean competitiveness by looking also at the strategic alliances with territories that are legally Europe, geographically Caribbean, which will facilitate greater export, both for Caribbean products that can be transformed or can be marketed through the French overseas regions or autonomous regions. And in that sense, we are now also negotiating associate membership to CARICOM, OECS and ACS. So in a way, I think it will be very important as we move into new trends of export that we also look at the existence in the Caribbean of territories that are really Caribbean, that want to be Caribbean, but also need a better involvement of regional and national governments to allow a better understanding of the trade realities of both territories and allowing for more integrated, wider Caribbean export and trade development. Thank you very much. And I would like to see if Madam Matherin could make some ideas on that, and also to Jimmy in terms of trying to develop a Caribbean Business Council that is au-delà of CARICOM, and trying to also include a lot of the Caribbean territories that are now really engaged into an increasing integration in the regional environment. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take two more questions. I know that Caribbean Export is doing some work in that regard, and the Export TT has been actively engaging with the French Caribbean as well. Any other question? Going once, going twice? Well, Give your panelists a round of applause, and I now hand over to the next group.